Sometimes the loneliest person in a city is not the one standing alone. It is the one everyone has forgotten to see. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, Claire Bennett stepped out of the neighborhood grocery store with tired feet, a worn canvas backpack resting on one shoulder, and a paperback novel tucked carefully beneath her arm. The cool autumn air wrapped around the nearly empty streets as the automatic doors quietly closed behind her. Downtown had changed into a different world after midnight. Office towers stood dark against the sky, coffee shops stacked their chairs for the night, and the distant sound of traffic echoed softly between rows of quiet buildings. Claire pulled the sleeves of her light gray hoodie over her hands and started the familiar 6-minute walk toward the bus stop. She smiled politely at the sanitation worker sweeping leaves from the sidewalk, thanked a delivery driver who paused to let her cross the street, and quietly picked up a paper cup someone had left beside the curb before dropping it into the nearest trash can. None of those small moments lasted more than a few seconds, and none seemed important enough for anyone else to notice. They simply felt natural to her. When she reached the old bus shelter, the digital clock mounted above the bench changed from 2:12 to 2:13. Claire settled onto the weathered wooden seat beneath the flickering streetlight, slipped a bookmark from between the pages of her novel, and allowed herself the first peaceful breath she had taken all evening. She loved this quiet hour because nobody expected anything from her. There were no shelves waiting to be stocked, no customers asking for directions, and no bills demanding attention until morning. There was only the comforting sound of distant traffic and another chapter waiting to be read. Several blocks away, a line of black sport utility vehicles moved smoothly through downtown with practiced precision. Inside the lead vehicle, Damien Moretti lowered a folder filled with business reports and glanced absent-mindedly through the rain-speckled window. His attention drifted across empty sidewalks before stopping unexpectedly beneath the lonely glow of an aging streetlight. A young woman sat completely alone, reading with such quiet focus that the restless city around her seemed to disappear. She was not scrolling through a phone. She was not looking around for attention. She appeared perfectly content sharing the silence with a book no one else cared to notice. Damien continued watching as the convoy approached the intersection. "Reduce speed," he said calmly. The driver obeyed immediately without asking why. The vehicles rolled forward more slowly, giving Damien only a few extra seconds to study the peaceful stranger. Claire never looked up. She smiled faintly at something she had just read and gently turned another page. Then the convoy continued into the sleeping city. She believed another ordinary night had quietly come and gone without anyone noticing she existed. She never imagined that somewhere beyond the fading taillights, one man found himself unable to forget the girl the entire city had walked past without seeing. Claire Bennett never noticed the black sport utility vehicle parked half a block away after the city bus finally arrived. She climbed aboard with the same gentle smile she offered every driver, tapped her transit card, and settled into the last empty seat beside the window. Within minutes, the bus disappeared into the sleeping neighborhoods while the convoy quietly changed direction. Damien Moretti remained silent until the tail lights vanished into the distance. His chief of security finally spoke. "Should we continue to tomorrow morning's executive meeting, sir?" Damien kept looking toward the empty bus stop before quietly answering, "Reschedule it." No one inside the vehicle questioned his decision, but everyone noticed it. Damien rarely changed his schedule, and never without a reason. Even he could not explain why the image of a young woman peacefully reading beneath an aging streetlight refused to leave his thoughts. Across town, Claire unlocked the door to her modest third-floor apartment and stepped inside. Her home was small but welcoming, with neatly folded blankets, a narrow bookshelf filled with borrowed novels, and several healthy green plants stretching toward the window where the first hints of dawn would soon appear. She placed her backpack beside the couch, watered each plant with patient care, then warmed a simple bowl of vegetable soup for dinner. A familiar orange stray cat climbed onto the fire escape outside her kitchen window exactly as it did almost every night. Claire smiled, opened the window a few inches, and placed a small dish of cooked chicken outside. "You remembered," she whispered with a quiet laugh as the cat happily began eating. After dinner, she opened a notebook where every monthly expense had been written in careful handwriting. Rent, utilities, bus fare, groceries, student loan payment. She counted the remaining cash in her wallet before gently closing the notebook with a peaceful smile. Enough for another week, she said softly to herself. The following morning, Claire walked the familiar 6 blocks to the grocery store beneath bright autumn sunshine. Along the way, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry 2 heavy reusable shopping bags across a busy crosswalk. Without hesitation, Claire stepped forward, carried the heavier bag, and stayed beside the woman until they safely reached the opposite sidewalk. She accepted nothing in return except a warm smile before continuing to work. Throughout the day she patiently helped customers, remembered the favorite cereal of a regular shopper, and knelt beside a young boy searching for the pasta his grandmother had written on a grocery list. By closing time, dozens of people had crossed her path, yet almost none remembered the name printed on her employee badge. Meanwhile, high above the city skyline, Damien sat alone inside his office with a slim folder resting on his desk. It contained only publicly available information about Claire Bennett. No headlines. No scandals. No remarkable achievements. Just an ordinary woman quietly living an ordinary life. Damien closed the folder, looked toward the city outside his window, and realized that for the first time in years, he found himself wondering whether someone so ordinary might become the most unforgettable person he had ever met. 3 quiet evenings passed without anything unusual happening, yet Damien Moretti caught himself glancing toward the clock more often than he wanted to admit. His calendar remained full of executive meetings, financial reports, and conversations that carried enormous responsibility, but every night his thoughts drifted back to the same weathered bus stop and the young woman who seemed perfectly content existing in a world that rarely noticed her. He had instructed his staff to gather nothing beyond publicly available information. No interviews. No surveillance. No disruption to her life. He wanted facts, not intrusion. The report resting on his desk remained surprisingly ordinary. Claire Bennett. 24 years old. Grocery store employee. Public library member. Regular volunteer at a neighborhood food pantry. No criminal record. No social media presence worth mentioning. No awards. No public recognition. Damien closed the folder slowly. Everything about her appeared ordinary, yet nothing about the feeling she left behind seemed ordinary at all. Across the city, Claire continued living exactly as she always had. She arrived at work before her shift began, greeted every coworker by name, and quietly organized a display that another employee had forgotten to finish the previous evening. She never mentioned who completed it, and when the department supervisor complimented the display, another coworker accepted the praise without realizing Claire had done the work. Claire simply smiled and continued stocking shelves. Later that afternoon, during her lunch break, she noticed a new employee searching every pocket for enough money to buy something from the vending machine. Without making the moment uncomfortable, Claire placed the sandwich she had packed herself on the table and said, "I made extra today." Before the young woman could refuse, Claire picked up her library book and walked outside to enjoy the autumn sunshine, allowing gratitude to remain unspoken. Near closing time, an elderly customer struggled to lift a large bag of dog food into a shopping cart. Claire hurried over, carried it with both hands, and walked beside the woman all the way to the checkout lane. When the customer offered her $20 as thanks, Claire laughed softly and shook her head. "Please spend it on your dog instead." The woman smiled with tears gathering in her eyes while Claire quietly returned to work as though nothing remarkable had happened. By coincidence, Damien's convoy waited at a nearby traffic light while one of his associates finished a brief call inside the store. Through the passenger window, Damien watched Claire help the elderly customer without realizing anyone was observing her. She expected no applause, no reward, and not even a thank you. She simply chose kindness because someone needed it. As the traffic light changed from red to green, the convoy continued through the intersection, but Damien remained thoughtful long afterward. For the first time in many years, he understood that true character revealed itself most clearly when nobody believed they were being seen, and he found himself wondering whether the quiet girl beneath the old streetlight would once again be waiting at exactly 2:13 in the morning. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt almost identical on the surface, yet something invisible had quietly begun to change. Claire Bennett still finished her shift after midnight, thanked every coworker before leaving, and walked the same familiar route toward the old bus stop beneath the fading glow of downtown lights. She never imagined that the smallest moments of her day had become meaningful to someone she had never truly met. On Wednesday afternoon, after finishing work a little earlier than expected, Claire stopped at a neighborhood flower shop. Instead of choosing the freshest bouquet displayed near the entrance, she noticed a small arrangement marked with a discount because several petals had begun to wilt. The cashier smiled apologetically and said, "Most customers pass those by." Claire gently lifted the bouquet into her hands and answered with a warm smile. "They are still beautiful. They only need someone willing to take them home." Back at her apartment, she carefully trimmed each stem, placed the flowers into a simple glass vase beside her bookshelf, and watched the little room become brighter without spending very much money. That same afternoon, Damien Moretti sat inside a conference room reviewing proposals for his company's annual community foundation. Usually the meeting followed the same predictable routine every year. Budgets were approved, donations were allocated, and executives quickly moved to the next topic. This time Damien paused before signing the final documents. He remembered the brief report mentioning Claire's volunteer work at a neighborhood food pantry and quietly asked, "Which part of the city receives the least private support?" Several executives exchanged surprised glances before one of them answered, "The East River neighborhood receives significantly less funding than the others." Damien signed a revised proposal that increased support for local libraries, food programs, and educational centers serving that community. There was no announcement, no press conference, and no publicity campaign. He simply moved to the next page as though it were an ordinary business decision. Late that evening, Claire arrived at the familiar bus shelter carrying another library novel beneath her arm. A nervous college student sat several feet away studying thick textbooks while repeatedly checking an almost empty wallet. Without saying very much, Claire reached into her grocery bag, removed the apple she had packed for herself, and offered it with an encouraging smile. "Long night?" she asked. The student laughed quietly. "Final exams." Claire wished the student good luck before returning to her book, never expecting another word. At that exact moment, Damien's convoy rolled slowly through the intersection. Looking through the passenger window, he witnessed yet another small act of kindness that would probably be forgotten by everyone except the person who received it. As the vehicles continued into the quiet city, Damien leaned back in thoughtful silence. He realized he was no longer curious because Claire seemed different from everyone else. He was curious because every ordinary day somehow revealed another quiet reason why the world should have noticed her long before he ever did. Friday evening arrived beneath a steady autumn rain that turned every downtown street into a mirror of shimmering lights. Claire Bennett finished cleaning the final checkout lane, wished her coworkers a peaceful night, and stepped outside beneath a small navy umbrella. The familiar 6-minute walk toward the bus stop felt quieter than usual. Raindrops tapped gently against the umbrella while cool air carried the scent of wet pavement through the nearly empty streets. By the time Claire reached the old shelter, the digital clock quietly changed from 2:12 to 2:13. She folded her umbrella, brushed a few drops of water from the weathered bench, and settled into her usual place beneath the flickering streetlight. Pulling another library novel from her backpack, she smiled softly as she found the page where she had stopped reading the night before. Around her, the city continued moving without paying attention to the young woman enjoying a peaceful moment before heading home. Several blocks away, Damien Moretti's convoy moved through the rain with quiet precision. He had promised himself he would simply continue home tonight. Curiosity, he believed, should never become a habit. Then a soft warning light appeared on the dashboard. The driver glanced toward the instrument panel before speaking calmly. "Sir, one of the tire pressure sensors is reporting an irregular reading. It is probably nothing serious, but I would like to inspect it." Damien nodded. "Pull over." The lead vehicle eased toward the curb only a short distance from the familiar bus shelter. While the driver stepped outside to inspect the tire, Damien left the vehicle to avoid standing in the rain. As he entered the shelter, Claire looked up from her book and offered the same warm smile she gave every stranger. "Looks like the weather convinced everyone to slow down tonight," she said. Damien returned the smile with quiet ease. "It seems determined to." For several peaceful seconds they listened to the rain falling beyond the shelter. Claire gently closed her novel with one finger holding her place. Damien glanced toward the cover. "Do you always carry a book?" Claire nodded. Waiting feels shorter when a good story is nearby. He considered the answer before asking, "Do you ever have a favorite?" Claire thought for a moment and smiled. "I think every book becomes a favorite if it finds me at the right moment." The simplicity of her answer caught him off guard. It was the kind of thought no boardroom discussion could ever produce. Before he could reply, the driver returned with reassuring news. "Everything is fine, sir." The sensor was affected by the cold rain. Almost at the same moment, Claire's bus appeared around the corner, its headlights stretching across the wet pavement. She slipped her novel into her backpack and stood. "I hope the rest of your night goes smoothly," she said sincerely. Damien inclined his head with genuine appreciation. "And I hope your next chapter is worth waiting for." Claire smiled before boarding the bus. As it disappeared into the quiet city, Damien remained beneath the aging streetlight for another moment, realizing that the shortest conversation of his entire week had somehow become the one he wanted to remember the longest. The following Monday arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air drifting through the quiet streets. Claire Bennett finished another late shift, thanked the night manager, and began the familiar walk toward the old bus stop with a paperback novel tucked beneath one arm. Since the rainy evening a few days earlier, she occasionally caught herself wondering about the calm stranger whose unexpected conversation had somehow remained in her thoughts. She still did not know his name, and strangely, she did not feel the need to. Some people entered life with long introductions. Others arrived through peaceful moments that spoke for themselves. When the digital clock above the shelter quietly changed to 2:13 in the morning, Claire smiled as though greeting an old friend. She settled onto the weathered bench and opened her novel, but only a few moments later she heard familiar footsteps approaching through the quiet night. Looking up, she recognized the same composed expression from beneath the rainstorm. "Good evening," Damien said with a polite smile. "Good evening," Claire replied warmly. "No car trouble tonight?" A faint laugh escaped him. "Fortunately not. I had a meeting a few blocks away and decided to walk." Claire placed her bookmark carefully between the pages of her novel. "That sounds much nicer than sitting in traffic." They shared a quiet laugh before their conversation wandered naturally from one subject to another. They talked about favorite places to read, how peaceful the city became after midnight, and why ordinary routines often held unexpected comfort. Claire admitted she preferred late evenings because the world finally seemed to slow down enough for people to notice simple things. Damien listened with genuine interest. "Most people spend their lives searching for something bigger," he observed. Claire looked toward the empty street before answering softly. "Sometimes the smallest moments become the ones we remember forever." Her words lingered in the cool night air. Just then, an elderly woman carrying 2 reusable grocery bags stopped beside the shelter after noticing the electronic schedule announcing that her bus had been delayed by nearly 20 minutes. Without hesitation, Claire stood, accepted one of the heavier bags, and helped the woman sit comfortably on the bench. Damien quietly moved a nearby trash can out of the way to create more space and held the shelter door open while the woman settled in. Neither of them treated the moment as anything unusual. They simply helped because help was needed. The grateful woman smiled warmly. "Thank you both." Claire answered first. "I hope you have a safe trip home." Damien simply nodded, allowing the attention to remain with Claire instead of himself. A few minutes later, the delayed bus finally arrived. Claire picked up her backpack and smiled at Damien before stepping toward the open doors. "Waiting feels much shorter with good company," she said. Damien watched the bus pull away before quietly looking at the glowing numbers above the shelter once more. For the first time in years, he realized he had begun measuring his days not by meetings completed or contracts signed, but by whether the clock would eventually reach 2:13 again. The next evening, Claire Bennett arrived at the grocery store a little earlier than usual after agreeing to cover an extra shift for a coworker who had become ill. The hours passed quietly as they always did. She restocked shelves, helped customers find forgotten items, and smiled whenever someone thanked her, never expecting them to remember her name after walking away. Shortly before closing, her manager gathered the staff to mention that a neighborhood youth center would be hosting a charity breakfast the following morning. Claire listened with quiet interest before finishing her final tasks and stepping into the cool autumn night. The familiar walk toward the old bus stop felt peaceful beneath the glow of scattered streetlights. When she reached the shelter, the digital clock changed to exactly 2:13 in the morning. She looked toward the weathered bench expecting another quiet evening with her book, but this time Damien was already there, holding a paper cup of coffee while watching the empty street with thoughtful eyes. Claire smiled naturally. "You are here before me tonight." Damien returned the smile. "It seems I finally arrived on time." They both laughed softly before sitting beneath the familiar streetlight. Their conversation wandered comfortably through favorite novels, childhood memories, and the strange calm that only existed after midnight when the city finally slowed its pace. Claire admitted she enjoyed these late hours because they reminded her that even busy places eventually became peaceful. Damien listened carefully before saying, "Most people spend their lives trying to be noticed." Claire looked toward the glowing numbers above the bus shelter and answered quietly, "Sometimes it is enough to notice someone else." Before Damien could respond, the television inside the convenience store across the street interrupted the silence with a breaking business report. Neither of them paid attention until the camera focused on a line of black sport utility vehicles arriving outside a downtown office tower. Reporters crowded around a familiar figure while photographers captured every movement beneath bright camera flashes. Claire slowly turned toward the screen. Then she looked back at the man sitting only a few feet away. The news anchor identified him as Damien Moretti, one of the city's most influential business leaders whose name appeared regularly in financial headlines and public discussions. Claire remained silent as countless small details suddenly made sense. The convoy. The security team. The late-night meetings. Damien noticed the realization settling across her expression and spoke before she felt obligated to ask any questions. "I should have introduced myself honestly from the beginning." Claire met his eyes and gently shook her head. "You never lied to me. I simply never knew who you were." Her bus appeared in the distance, its headlights reflecting across the quiet pavement. She stood slowly, adjusting the strap of her backpack before offering him a thoughtful smile. "I think I need a little time to understand everything." Damien nodded with complete respect. "Take all the time you need." Claire stepped aboard without another word, and as the bus disappeared into the sleeping city, Damien remained beneath the aging streetlight, quietly wondering whether the simple friendship that had grown one conversation at a time would survive the truth that neither of them could hide anymore. Claire Bennett spent the next 2 evenings thinking far more than she spoke. She searched Damien Moretti's name only once, then quietly closed her laptop after reading a handful of articles that seemed determined to describe the businessman instead of the man she had come to know beneath the old streetlight. Every headline focused on wealth, influence, negotiations, and public appearances. None mentioned the stranger who had helped an elderly woman with heavy grocery bags or listened patiently while she talked about library books and peaceful nights. Claire realized newspapers could measure success, but they could not measure character. On Friday afternoon, the grocery store manager gathered everyone before closing and explained that several unopened boxes of canned food, bottled water, and pantry supplies needed to be delivered to a neighborhood community center before the weekend family event began. The scheduled delivery driver had become sick, and someone needed to volunteer. Claire immediately raised her hand. "I can take them after my shift." Her manager smiled with obvious relief. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." A short time later, Claire carefully parked the small delivery van behind the community center, where cheerful volunteers welcomed her with grateful smiles. Together they unloaded every box while laughing about the unusually cool weather arriving earlier than expected. Across the street, another event was taking place. A newly renovated youth learning center, supported by several local businesses, was preparing for its official opening. Television crews adjusted cameras, photographers tested their equipment, and city officials greeted invited guests near the entrance. Claire intended to leave quietly before the ceremony attracted larger crowds, but the familiar sight of several black sport utility vehicles entering the parking area caught her attention. Damien stepped from the lead vehicle wearing the same calm expression she remembered from the bus stop. Instead of walking directly toward the waiting reporters, he first greeted the volunteers arranging books, chairs, and supplies inside the building. He thanked them individually before turning toward the community center parking lot, where he noticed Claire standing beside the now empty delivery van with signed delivery papers resting in her hands. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Damien walked toward her instead of the cameras waiting nearby. Several photographers instinctively redirected their lenses, curious about the young woman who had unexpectedly captured his attention. Claire suddenly became aware of people watching, but Damien's expression never changed. It remained exactly as kind and unhurried as it had been beneath the weathered streetlight at 2:13 in the morning. "You brought the donations," he said with a genuine smile. Claire nodded modestly. "They were needed today." Damien glanced toward the volunteers carrying supplies through the entrance before looking back at her. "Then everyone inside is fortunate that you said yes." Claire smiled softly, understanding that he had noticed the quiet choices she never expected anyone to remember. For the first time in her life, she realized that being seen did not require becoming someone different. Sometimes it simply meant meeting the one person willing to recognize the goodness that had always been there. Several weeks passed, and life quietly settled into a rhythm neither Claire Bennett nor Damien Moretti had expected to cherish. Claire still worked the late shift at the neighborhood grocery store, still borrowed novels from the public library every weekend, still watered the small collection of plants beside her apartment window, and still found gentle ways to help strangers without ever expecting anyone to notice. Damien still led executive meetings, reviewed complicated agreements, and carried responsibilities that stretched across the entire city. Their lives remained remarkably different, yet every evening seemed to move toward the same familiar destination. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, the weathered bus stop beneath the aging streetlight became a quiet meeting place where titles no longer mattered. Some nights they talked about books that stayed with people long after the final page. Other nights they shared childhood memories, favorite neighborhoods, or the peaceful feeling that arrived when the city finally became silent. Sometimes they simply sat together without speaking at all, discovering that comfortable silence could become its own kind of conversation. Claire slowly realized that Damien never measured people by influence, wealth, or reputation. He noticed the little things most of the world overlooked, a kind smile, a patient answer, or the simple decision to help someone without expecting gratitude. Damien discovered that Claire judged no one by headlines or public opinion. She cared only about how people treated others when nobody was watching. One cool evening, Claire arrived carrying 2 paper cups filled with hot tea. Damien was already sitting on the familiar bench, looking toward the quiet street where they had first crossed paths. She smiled as she handed him one of the cups. "I thought you might be here." He accepted it with genuine gratitude and smiled back. "I was hoping you would think that." They sat beneath the old streetlight while buses quietly arrived and disappeared into the sleeping city. After a comfortable silence, Claire looked toward the glowing skyline and asked softly, "Does everyone recognizing your name ever become exhausting?" Damien considered the question carefully before answering. "People often recognize my position before they recognize me." Claire smiled gently. "Most people never recognized either for me." Damien turned toward her with quiet sincerity. "The first night I saw you, I realized this city had forgotten one of its kindest people." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. "I never felt invisible whenever I was helping someone," she answered. Those simple words settled peacefully between them, carrying more truth than either of them expected. Months later, the bus stop looked exactly as it always had. The digital clock still changed to 2:13 every night. The same weathered bench remained beneath the familiar streetlight. Yet everything had changed. The place that had once represented loneliness had quietly become a place of belonging. Claire no longer wondered whether anyone noticed her, and Damien no longer hurried past the ordinary moments that truly mattered. Sometimes the greatest changes never begin with grand gestures or extraordinary events. Sometimes they begin when one person chooses to truly see another while the rest of the world keeps walking, and from that single quiet moment, two completely different lives discover they have finally found their way home.